Hello and welcome to my video channel. We're in recess at German University. It's pretty much the middle between the fall and the spring term over here in Germany, but I take the liberty of interrupting the recess lull with a video on a matter of the day. Last week, an expert panel voted down the proposal to declare a new epoch, the Anthropocene, and that decision sent shockwaves through the academic world and beyond the academic world. The Anthropocene is about the human place on this planet and how it has changed over time. So that's definitely something that requires an input from an environmental historian. I've covered the Anthropocene in my lecture on the history of energy. So technically this is an addendum to my own video series. But of course, there's also the vanity of the historian. How many times, if you are trained as a historian, have a video channel like this one, how many times can you comment on a matter of the day and really record something in terms of newsflash mode? So this is my newsflash. Anthropocene is not a geological epoch, and here comes the environmental historian who will make sense of it all. So what is this about? Well, in a nutshell, my verdict is this is the wrong question being answered by the wrong people in a pretty awkward way. To start with the wrong question part, well, of course, asking questions is a key topic for a historian, actually the key skill that we bring to the engagement with the past. Every historian is trained to reflect on the questions that he or she is asking. And every German historian knows about Johann Gustav Droysen, the leading theorist of the craft of history in the 19th century, who said that reflecting on the questions that guide your research is the supreme skill of every historian. So if you look at the question whether the Anthropocene is a geological epoch or not, if you look at this question in this vein, you see very quickly this is not really a good way to frame a research question. It's a yes or no question. And questions of this type are best reserved for questions when it's about matter of fact, whether something is a fact or something is fiction. Separating fact from fiction is one of the key things that we historians do. Some things have happened, some things have not happened, but some people say it has happened. Separating the two is something where you need yes, no. But the Anthropocene is not a question that you should answer in a yes, no mode. The Anthropocene is about a concept. And when you deal with concepts in history, you should ask a different set of questions. Like, what do you see when you use a certain concept? What does it highlight? What does it ignore? Is the concept based on a proper theoretical framework? In short, in dealing with concepts, the key question is, what is the concept really good for? Well, if you look at the Anthropocene, it has its merit. It highlights the extent to which humans have shaped natural cycles on this planet, or maybe we should better say how they shaped cycles that we commonly view as natural, because there is not much nature left in the sense of untouched nature on this planet due to the fact that we have changed our ways enormously over the last 1 or 2 centuries. If you look at the flow of water, if you look at soil erosion, if you look at the nitrogen cycle, the carbon dioxide cycle, there are quite a few material flows on our planet that we can no longer understand unless we account for the role of 8 billion humans on this planet. And there's plenty of researchers who've analyzed these flows. In fact, there's an entire branch of science that looks at these matters, Earth system science, which studies the material and energy flows on a planetary scale, who try to quantify the flows, who try to model the flows, what goes where, to what extent. And the results of Earth system science have shown time and again that we are now, on quite a few issues, on a par with the forces of nature. And if you have this outside role of humans in planetary processes and material and energy flows, maybe it's legitimate to speak about an age of humans on our planet, and that's exactly what the word Anthropocene means. But here's the point about the wrong people. Last week's decision was not a decision taken by Earth system researchers. It was a decision taken by geologists. And these are different researchers with a different mindset. They're not so much interested in the flow of materials and energy flows. The mind of geology, if you pardon the generalization, is essentially taxonomic. They want to classify geological specimen, and that requires a rigid framework, including rigid timescales that everybody can agree on, so can work and classify everything that you find out there in the field. Now, to be even more precise, this isn't really about defining timescales. When geologists talk about periods, they're not really concerned first and foremost about time. They're concerned about geological sample. One sample from one specific place. The candidate for defining the Anthropocene was about the sediments in a lake in Canada, Crawford Lake in Ontario, a deep lake with lots of sediments that deposit in a fairly regular, undisturbed base, and that provided a geological record where you can identify shifts that would justify talking about a new geological epoch. All these things matter for geologists. This is a legitimate approach, but legitimate for the purposes of geology. If you look at this in a wider context, if you think about what does this say about the place of humans on our planet, what does it mean for our engagement with environmental challenges? Well, I always had my doubts whether geology could play a big role in making sense of highly dynamic processes, and maybe after last week's decision we can say that these doubts were legitimate. Last week's decision reflects a queasiness within geology about modern times and the dynamism that you're dealing with, or shall we say, it shows the discipline's reluctance, if not inability, to speak about the last 200 years on our planet's history with scientific authority. Well, fortunately, there are other people who can speak about what happened in the last 200 years with some authority. That includes the Earth system scientists whose results really should be acknowledged by each and everybody who studies the recent past. And of course, there is us, the historian, whose natural task is thinking about turning points, thinking about periodizations. And if you look at the approach that geologists have taken as historian, the first and most fundamental thing you should say, stop thinking about this in terms of one place or one moment in time. The entire thought that there was one moment when humanity stepped into a new epoch, that's storytelling made in Hollywood. It's nice and it's dramatic and maybe creates a certain sense of excitement when there's that one moment where we stepped into a new epoch, when the first nuclear explosion shook the New Mexico desert, humans entered a new epoch. Well, you can probably tell exciting Hollywood-style stories with that, but if you argue in this way, you won't last long in a decent history cinema. The making of global modernity is about many small steps that added up to a watershed of the first order. There is not one moment, one individual, one place, one decision that made the difference. The key point is that many decisions, many steps accumulated to something really big. So the Anthropocene decision really reflects a poorly phrased question answered by the wrong discipline. And then there is the awkward way of taking this decision. Last week's vote came from, and I need to look this up in my script here because I want to be precise here. The vote came from the Subcommission on Quaternary Stratigraphy, who voted on the findings on the Anthropocene Working Group. The Subcommission on Quaternary Stratigraphy was one of three committees who needed to vote on this proposal. Each of these committees had to vote with a 60% majority, and only then would the Anthropocene turn into a category with the stamp of approval from the International Union of Geological Sciences. Well, if you are a child of the Cold War years, like I am, that really reminds you of something. This is a mode of decision-making that really has an air of the age of planned economies, of centralized planning, where you have a working group that reports to a committee, which then reports to another committee, and then it reports to, some kind of plenary, and at the end, somebody will, take a decision. I guess the point is clear. If you use a layered bureaucratic apparatus to reach something as dynamic as, an economy or an Earth system, don't complain if you end up looking foolish. And as on looking foolish, the ultimate irony of last week's decision is that there are no credible claims that the decision-making process violated procedural rules. If there's something more embarrassing in science than a complex decision-making process by committee, it is scientists failing to follow the committee rules that they themselves set up. So where does this leave us in the view to the Anthropocene? Well, I think we should still use the term, but you should always be able to explain what it means. Why is it a helpful concept? What does it say? What are the theoretical, the conceptual underpinnings? What is the empirical evidence that the concept flags? Why does it matter in which way? And I say that with a view to the other big group that was a loser of last week's decision. I think it's clear that the vote says something about the inability or unwillingness of geology to engage with the environmental crisis of our time. But I think the vote is also a slap in the face for every academic who talked about the Anthropocene as if it were an act of faith. Everything believing that Anthropocene was something that showed that you're an open-minded, rational environmental citizen, or if you don't believe in the Anthropocene, that you have not taken account of where we are. They don't know what all this is about. There are quite a few academics who talk about the Anthropocene as if it were that magic word that explains everything. And plenty of people evoke this with, quasi-religious favor, be it to make the case for rigorous policies against climate change, or out of moral concern about the damage that we've done on our planet, or maybe because it was the buzzword du jour, a cheap way to look cool and to get grant money because you have understood the buzzword of our time. So last week's decision puts us where we should be. If you use the word Anthropocene, you should be clear about what it means. And if you're one of the people who have gone transurfing in recent years and have used this word as if it were the ultimate truth about man and nature, well, for you, it's welcome back to planet Earth.